Today's class is entitled, What New Technologies Will Aid You in Finding Your Ancestors? Our presenter is James Tanner. He has an extensive background and knowledge on available technical tools that will assist us in doing family history research, and in the new advances now available. James is also very generous with his time, wears many hats, and is willing to share his knowledge with us. I'll now turn the time over to James. James?
Okay, so we are going to talk about new technology. There are always new technologies, but right now we're going to talk about some of the specific ones for genealogy. Some things never seem to change. It's just like, we live here next to the mountains, and you look at them every day, they're just the same every day. Well, technology is not one of those things. It's not one of the things that doesn't change. It's something that changes constantly. And you can either get upset with the changes, or you can kind of enjoy them and live with it, because they're going to keep happening. And it's just sort of the thing. I thought it would be interesting to go back a few years, back to sometime, revealing my age, back to my teenage years when I started to become aware of all this stuff. And you can read down through that list. I'm not going to go through it individually, but notice we didn't have cell phones. In fact, I can remember my experience in seeing the first portable phones. They were about the size of 2 bricks put together. We called them the brick phones. And computers, of course, played a tremendous impact in my life, because we started with the Apple II computers and worked our way up to the iMacs and iPhones and things that we have today. And of course, we didn't have the World Wide Web. I always reflect back on how my life would have been different had I had instant access to all this information back when I was a teenager. I think I would have done a lot better in school, but of course, everything else about life would have changed just like it did when the internet came out. As a matter of note, if you'd also like to have an age reveal here, I was teaching at Scottsdale Community College in Scottsdale, Arizona, and they announced one day that if anybody would like to see it, we have a computer set up in one of the classrooms connected to something that's new. It's called the World Wide Web, and we haven't really had time to look at it. So we all trooped in there, people did, and I looked at it. And at the time the World Wide Web started, that's the internet, there were 6 websites. So that was kind of right at the beginning. And so I've been on it almost constantly since that time. Lots of things. You list down through here, you'll see that the list just could go on and on and on of all the things that we've developed. So what did we have? What we didn't have, but what we had, of course, was family group records in big binders, and lots of paper records. And some of us still have those huge piles of paper records. My wife and I have been working through our pile now for years and years and years, and we're finally getting final control over the pile. So progress is slow, but it takes a long time. So as far as I was concerned, and as far as genealogy is concerned, I would think that the first great technology that has impacted us more than anything else, any one other technology, has been the ability to digitize records and documents. I came into genealogy during the microfilm age, when microfilm was the big thing. The difficulty with microfilm was that you had to be in one place at one time to see the microfilm. In other words, I couldn't be at home unless I wanted to spend a lot of money in acquiring microfilm, or even more money to buy a microfilm reader. And so that was difficult. So you had to go someplace and actually look at the microfilm, and it was completely sequential. In other words, you start at frame number 1 and you go all the way through to the end of however many frames there were. And of course, if you look at the files now, the digitized files, you'll know that some of the files can have 2,000 or 3,000 images, and each one of those was a microfilm page. So we got to learn to crank the roller advance on the microfilm very fast because we'd often have to crank through a whole roll of microfilm. And one of the developments, of course, was the microfilm readers became electrical, and you could just push on a button or push on a lever and have the microfilm advance rapidly. You didn't have to sit there and crank with your hand. And there were all sorts of things like that that happened. Well, eventually, digital technology was developed, and Family Search and other websites began, and companies began digitizing records that were genealogically significant. When FamilySearch.org came in line, I have a video on the history of FamilySearch.org. So if you want to look that up on our YouTube channel, on the BYU Family History Library YouTube channel, you can kind of pace through and watch all the changes from the original Family Search website up to fairly recent Family Search websites. But anyway, so this process has had great potential, and as we get more and more records digitized, the impact will be even greater. We're not of such great necessity as we were to travel to archives and repositories. We're not such great to try to find the records physically and gain access to them individually, because so many of these records have now been added. But if you do want the perspective, we haven't begun to really dent the number of records that are still on paper. A few years ago, I started to get the impression that we were pretty much getting along the line there, until I had the opportunity to go to the Maryland State Archives for a year. And we digitized records for a year, and probably there were 4 cameras and a group of volunteers who prepared the documents for digitizing. And so basically, over that year period, we estimate that we digitized about 2 million records. That was just the barest dent into the huge amount of records in that archive that are still on paper. And you can multiply that across archives all the way around the world. There's even, though there are huge digital projects, there's still a long way to go. Probably the biggest example of that is the National Archives in the United States, U.S. National Archives and Administration. And it has billions and billions of records, and a vanishingly small percentage of those have been digitized. So there's still huge amounts of effort that needs to be made. But one of the real advantages in this whole thing was the ability to digitize documents with a smartphone. Now, I did that today because I needed to transmit a file to another part of the country. And I basically just pulled out my phone, took a picture of the document, transferred that to my computer. Because we're in Apple, I used AirDrop, and basically the document appeared on my computer. I was then able to upload it to that website that I already had open on my computer, and that took about 2 minutes total to take the document and get it uploaded. But for those of us who are doing research, carrying our phones into to do research is the real advantage, because we don't need to carry all that paper. I have a substantial portion of all of my genealogy research on this phone, and I can do thousands of photos. And so basically, I can gather information rapidly and bring it home to work on if I need to from a repository that still doesn't have things digitized. So everything's being impacted daily by the available digital historical documents. This screenshot is of the historical images section of the FamilySearch.org website. If you go to the search tab and it says records, the next one is images, and that's not photos, that's records. And the number here on the front of this website, part of the website, is a counter that keeps going up every day. And that is the number of images that are being added and have been added to Family Search. Now, if you go to other websites, you'll find that the numbers are on some websites are far greater than Family Search. And so when you combine all of the records on all of the different websites, there's just tens of billions of records that are available that have genealogical significance. And so this basically is changing constantly. And if you want to see, there's a link there that says view the most recently added images. You can actually see from day to day the images that are being added to the Family Search website, and you can look at the numbers on the other websites and see equally the numbers of new records that are going up all the time. It's tremendous. And most of the research, in my explanation, it depends on the part of the world you're from, obviously, because if you're from someplace where there's not that many images yet, then you really haven't got the impact. But in countries like North and South America, much of the information that you need to do your research back into the early 1800s is available online. In the United States, the number of records that are online are sufficient for most people, unless they come from outside and come from places where the records aren't available. If your ancestors have lived in the United States into the 1800s, you'll be able to find a lot of records. Now, there's always exceptions. There's people that seem to appear mysteriously that are foundlings on church doorsteps or orphans or any other things that we're discovering the parents. Even the beginning of this is difficult. But with other advances, like we'll talk about in a minute here, DNA and things like that, then many of those barriers are being broken by being able to find relatives that are discoverable in a sense. So here's what it looks like when you go to the images section. This is records from Sweden. You can see these records on the right-hand side were put online in 2018. Why are they still here? This is the pile of records waiting to be indexed and waiting to be cataloged. So they're not in the catalog, they're not on index. Your name search won't find these. The only way to look at these is to look at each one of these individual records on sets of records. The images that you see, the numbers that you see on the image count, as an indication of a group of records that were digitized by the people doing the digitization, primarily missionaries for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints all over the world, and over 300, probably about a little over 300 cameras out there constantly taking pictures. Things didn't slow down much. If you would think they would, but they didn't slow down much during the pandemic. The work just kept going ahead. There were some places where they had to kind of switch around cameras, but primarily there was enough work that was readily available that we could keep going. By the way, the image count there was about whatever time period that was involved. It could have been a week, it could have been 10 days, whatever it is that this particular digitizing group were doing. Then they sent their hard drives to Salt Lake City. They were processed by Family Search. They were then erased and sent back so they could do more images, but the images were then transferred to the holding. Some very basic things were done, like this, showing the place, the date, the record type, and the image count. And then they're put online here on Family Search. Now, that's the good news. The difficulty with these records is that they say religious records. So what is a religious record? Well, you're going to have to look at every one of those records, just go through each of those 635 images to see whether or not that something in that particular place is interesting to you. So until they are indexed and cataloged, which they are processing, this pile of records will exist. And I assume that because they'll always be behind until they get even better technology than we have today, in which case these records are, but right now they're moving very rapidly through. If you get a notice from Family Search every week, if you like, you go into your settings in Family Search and just click and add all of the stuff that they send out. And then you'll get a list of all the new records that have been indexed lately every week. So there's a lot of information coming out. Now we're going to look at the results of that. What was the results as far as being able to access and look at records, not just specifically genealogy, but records in general? And the largest of these websites that I'm aware of is archive.org. And if you look at that little indicator there with the little icons, you'll find that there are right now, today, or yesterday when I upgraded this, 36,165,411 books and texts that have been scanned and digitized by archive.org, or the Internet Archive. And they're completely searchable, word for word. And the big problem we've always had with these online things like Google and some of the others, and Family Search in particular, is that you'll look at a book and say, man, that probably has my information in it, and it'll be copyrighted and you won't be able to see it. Well, coming to the archive.org is a different experience, because this is a library, and if you encounter a book that is basically copyrighted, you can check it out. So first of all, if it's not copyrighted, you can download it, the whole book, and to your desk if you want to do that. I mean, they're storing it for you. You could put it on your computer if you wanted to, but it's more convenient sometimes, especially if it's something you're going to use constantly. You don't have to go to the website. And you can download in any one of those long list of processes that are available. So you can download the whole file as individual JPEGs. You can download it as a PDF file, a torrent file. If you know what that is, you might want that. Full text files of the whole document. Some of these are not really easy to use. And I not obviously, but I prefer to look at the PDF copies because they're easier to read and very copyable if you need to copy something out of the book. But give you some comparison here. This particular collection of books now far exceeds all of the texts and all of the manuscripts. All of the documents on this particular website and archive.org now exceed by magnitudes the number of records in the Library of Congress, which has always been considered to be the largest library in the world. Well, I'm guessing that given the number of images on this website, that there is probably no close even second place to the size of this, because the number of images is into the billions and billions of images. There are, for example, over 770 billion websites that have been archived in here. So it's an amazing resource. You can also, as I indicated, you can get a copyrighted publication. Here's a brand new, or not too brand new, but a recent book that's copyrighted, and you'll see up at the top that it says you can borrow it for 1 hour. Well, that seems like, well, what are you going to do, borrow it for 1 hour? What I've found is that unless there's a lot of demand for that particular book, which probably is not for most genealogy books, to be realistic, then you can click on that borrow for 1 hour every time you come back to read the book. Or if it expires during the time, you just click, and then they conveniently bring you back to the page you were on. So it's not impossible to read through an entire, in this case, pretty substantially long book doing this. So it's there, it's interesting, and it is highly usable. Now, there's another thing we can do, and that is we can use smartphones for recording oral histories. You might be aware on Family Search, we've had being able to record audio files for some time. They're limited to about 10 minutes, so you have little bites of 10-minute files. On MyHeritage, the recordings you can make are substantially longer. And so using your iPhone, your Android phone, or using a microphone like the one I'm using for this broadcast or whatever, you can record family history from individuals. I did that. I've been doing that for the greater part of my life, not quite as consistently as I wish I had, but I've been able to get recordings from quite a few people, and some of those have ended up in being collected into a library. So that's an interesting way to do things. In one project, I went to the BYU library and I said, I am going to do a bunch of recordings of former professors and people who worked at the Brigham Young University. Do you want the collection? And they said yes. And so now they have quite a few oral histories, one of which was about 7 hours long. So they're substantial. To kind of a shortcut to doing all this is Family Search Memories, because if you have this on your app, on your iPad or your iPhone or your Android phone, you can use the phone to take pictures and directly upload them to Family Search, to the memory section. So you can do that just by going into the app, giving it access to your camera, and then taking the pictures of photographs or of documents, and those will then automatically be put into memories. Then you can go through in the memories and tag the people and put in more information about where and when and how the pictures were taken. So this is a fast and easy way to get your information in. And it improves all the time. There's always improvements here. And the different technologies reinforce each other, because what we're looking at here is doing audio recordings and then being able to do the images, but you can always put in text files. You can do gathering all sorts of kinds of information. They do not do videos yet on Family Search. The main reason is that they're very difficult to audit, to go through and see if they're acceptable or contain either information that's undesirable, of pictures that are undesirable, or if they contain copyright or other violations. So it's easier to handle photographs and audio files right now. But the issue is this: as we watch this technology advance, we've also had the advances in iPhones. For example, when I started using the first digital cameras, I have a few old digital images when the digital camera was 2 megapixels. And the last upgrade of the iPhone, which was the iPhone 13, that had a 12 megapixel, but the technology had expanded to make the 12 megapixels extremely more, had contained more detail and information than previously. So there's been advances in making it higher resolution, better quality images all along. And the newest iPhone came out with 48 megapixel camera, so the even a higher resolution on this. Now, what did you need? Well, most of that exceeds the resolution power of the human eye. We could get into that comparison, but basically, you really don't need that. What we see and what we get out of a 12 megapixel camera is very adequate for preserving photographs and certainly for preserving any kind of text or documents or certificates or whatever. So now we can digitize practically everything. And this is kind of a selection of the digital equipment that's available at the BYU Family History Library. All of these machines have sort of specialized uses. You can use them to digitize cassettes or cassette tapes. You can use them to digitize VHS and other 8mm film. The Epson one up at the top of this view, the Epson printer up there, the scanner will scan photographs very quickly, like that through the machine. And the big scanner here on the right with that's the light color, that one will do a sheaf of paper, 500 pieces of paper, in about anything under about 10 to 15 minutes total. So that's double-sided. So you can do a lot of information And this is one reason why we've been able to make progress with our own piles, because we're using these devices in addition to the other things that we have. And just for instance, I've been doing instructional videos on each of the pieces of equipment in the library. And we've been working our way through all of the different devices and all of the information, all the images, and even the movies that are incorporated in those, the videos that are incorporated within the video are made with my iPhone camera. So everything I'm doing to create those particular videos can be handled with my iPhone, and obviously with video editing software and microphones and recording capabilities and all that. So those are, but it's not simple. It's a complex process, but it's very doable with just with an iPhone. Now, one thing that's come up in the last few years and been growing is what they call artificial intelligence, and it's debatable whether the word intelligence is really applicable, but now that they call it or artificial intelligence or AI has really begun to have an impact on the genealogy world. And it's not in a way that you can see it, because what happens is that the records that are being added to the big websites now are being processed primarily. First, they were processed through what's called optical character recognition, or OCR, where the computers programs were recognizing printed text, typed text with formed letters. And then it's for many, many years now, at least the last 15 that I've been aware of or more, they've been working on handwriting recognition, which of course would make a tremendous impact on genealogy. And surprisingly, it already has. You may or may not be aware that the 1950 US Census was entirely indexed by artificial intelligence handwriting recognition. And that was on Ancestry. Now, some of the other websites are now completing their indexes and now getting all of their records up available, but Ancestry was way ahead. And then we had a shared project for Family Search and Ancestry, where volunteers went in and edited the transcription that was made by the artificial intelligence. It's not 100%. It's not perfectly perfect, because nothing is perfect. And the way that people wrote their letters and crossed through them and scribbled them in the census, some of them defy reading at all by anyone, even someone looking at it. So a person looking at it. So, but the vast amount of the information in the census was very expeditiously indexed and made available to the public. And I have been using the 1950 census very substantially over the last few months in doing research for a presentation at RootsTech. So it's been a great assistance to me to be able to use all of that information that's been digitized. I just thought I'd throw in sort of a reference here. This is Inviting AI into the Archives, the Reception of Handwritten Recognition Technology into Historical Manuscript Transcription. So the substance here of this little article, and I'm going to put the link up there. This is just an example. This article that I'm not particularly saying to go and read this article because it doesn't really matter. But libraries and archives are now routinely investing in the digitization of their manuscripts and print collections. So as they go through the process of using artificial intelligence to work back through all of the different texts, now you'll see that this big backlog of material that's in the images section of Family Search will be started to be, and if you watch the announcements that come out weekly from Family Search, you'll see 1 million records indexed, 2 million records indexed, 3 million record indexed. That's in a week, instead of having it take place over a long time. And obviously, there are going to be some level of errors in that transcription, but it gives you at least a leg up that we didn't have previously. This is the big example. This is what will be noted as the first major use of artificial intelligence, handwriting recognition on a very large scale to create a usable genealogical product, if you will, something that would be actually usable to someone using the website for research. And so this is where the vast amount of the work and innovation is going into trying to develop this type of information. Now, what that does is it also kind of, on the side, we have what we call record hints or matches. And basically, these record hints or matches use computer technology, artificial intelligence type programs that are very complicated, that will look at the information that's in the now that it's been digitized in the digital databases, and then extract the information that you personally might be interested in if you're putting your information into a family tree. So if you go to Family Search and Ancestry and MyHeritage and Find My Past and the French programs and some of the others that have family trees, you'll find that those, to some extent, those programs are all using record matches or record hints to help you advance your research. Now, sometimes you can get a little frustrated and say, well, that's not really my family, and I don't know why you're showing me all this. But the real part of this is that it speeds up the work considerably. Now, as I focus on parts of the Family Search family tree that are not end-of-line situations, because I'm very well aware of every end of line of every single one of my ancestral lines going back. I know where they end. And even though there's lots and lots of different ones. And usually they end for a reason. And the reason is usually because there are no records or because the people were so obscure that you couldn't ever find them. And for that reason, it's very time-consuming and very frustrating. But if you start doing descendancy research, you immediately get into these records that I mentioned in the 1800s and into the 1900s, and all of a sudden your vista opens up and you have a lot more people that you can look at. So those are the kinds of things. And plus you're using those record hints constantly because they come up as you go along and add research and add information. And you get more suggestions from the programs. I just went through this afternoon, some searches in the United States in the 1800s. And I went into Ancestry for a list of the same people and came up with like 12 or 15 record hints, but the Greenleafs, and most all of them were not the people I was looking for. So it's just, you have to be very careful, but but the pieces of information that were provided were extremely helpful in getting additional information about the families. Now, there's other online resources. We have a tendency to focus a lot on Family Search and Ancestry and MyHeritage and Find My Past and the other big websites. And there's advertising, and they are the ones that push it and say they've got the largest collection in the world or whatever. But there are a lot of digitized websites out there. For example, the National Archives of Canada has virtually everything digitized. And there are websites like this one that have collected genealogical information on Danish immigrants to the United States and this particular museum and center. And I just use this as an example, but there's just literally hundreds, maybe thousands of websites like this online that have substantial digital collections. Usually universities have digital collections. Just about any historical society, there's just a lot of records out there that are being digitized. Now, we all of us, if we go back far enough in time, will encounter a different language. If you go back speaking English and you think you're just going to get away scot-free, you'll realize that by the time you get into the 1700s that you may not recognize a lot of what's going on with that language. And so that's the way it is around the world. But obviously we have people that were doing genealogy all around the world. And we need a kind of a way to get into information that's in a language we do not know. And so we can use now programs like Google Translate, where you can use the language to translate from what you're looking at to something that approximates English in all these different languages. So you may not have use for all of this, but you may have use for part of it. And you can literally go through and translate different forms like census records and church records and all of those using Google Translate. And in fact, the technology is very much more sophisticated than it looks, because you can use your smartphone and Google Translate. If, for instance, if you have something on the screen that's in a language you don't understand, it recognizes text very well, but not so great on handwriting. But if you put it up, your camera up and look at it and hit the little marker down on your iPhone or your Android phone when you're looking at Google on the computer for Translate, it will actually take any type text, signs out the window of the car, whatever, out. Anything you want to get translated, it will automatically translate on your phone. And you can look into that. Just look up translation on your phone and with images, with taking photos and things like that with your camera. So you put your camera in there and open it up, and then all of a sudden you're translating all the signs and text there is. So it's a fast way to look at it. You don't have to click on it. You don't have to copy it and paste it into Translate. You just pick up your phone with the camera and point it at the screen and have it translate whatever you're looking at. Interesting way to work. We have to always mention the constantly improving DNA testing and results. I have DNA tests on Ancestry and MyHeritage. And when I first started, I was wondering who I really was, because my paper genealogy research didn't correspond very much with what they were saying I was related to out there. So basically, you're saying that you're finding as time goes on, and as the databases on these programs continue to grow, and as their ability to make more and more distinctions increases with a vast amount of computer power we have now, that their accuracy becomes greater. Except still with me, we have some really, really kind of mystery things, because I come up with 3.5% Italian, and I have never come across anyone who was an Italian in any of the research that I've done. So I don't have any idea where I got that. And as far as Baltic in the 1% and Western Asian, I don't know. I do know that, and up there in Latvia, Lithuania, and Belarus, I have no idea either. So it's kind of interesting. That's Baltics. And so basically, where did these people come from? How did I ever get DNA from these people? That's still something that remains to be said. And it might be someday that I find out that I had relatives who actually came from those places. Now, one thing that's been kind of just fun, but it's has a practical use, and that is photo enhancing, repairing colorization, and animations. Now, this comes entirely right now in the genealogical world from MyHeritage, and it's just part of the MyHeritage package of things that you can do. So you can take the photograph on your left, and through enhancing and repair and colorization, you can come up with the photograph on the right. And if you want to get scary enough, you can also get some animation into the photos. So you can take any there's a little bit of parameters on the size of the image. You can't use little tiny thumbnails, but you can do that and have this animation effect and the colorization effect. And it's It's quite impressive. Their latest development, which I did not include because it doesn't really bear anything on your own ancestry or history, other than for a kind of a entertainment value, is they also can use artificial intelligence to put your pictures into a different time frame of people, like Roman soldiers and Civil War soldiers and English, old Victorian and caveman, everything else, anything you can think of that they're starting to put, and it's quite amazing. It's very funny. It looks, especially when I first started using it and did a few pictures of my own that I uploaded, showed them to my grandkids, and they all cracked up. They thought it was just hilarious that I looked like that. So it's an interesting technology, and it'll have quite a bit of use. So here you go. You see on the left from MyHeritage, this is enhancing a photo. You take that photo on the left that has that cast that's created by the change in the chemicals of the photograph, and then in a few seconds, it will do the photograph on the right. Now, in this case, there's still some defects in the photo that didn't get repaired. It's not perfect, but it's fast, and it's very, very helpful to being able to see more detail and be able to really make the pictures come back to where they should have been and preserved. There's some side technology that perhaps we wouldn't be directly aware of, but one of the technologies that's extremely helpful for genealogical research is, once again, the ability to use the artificial intelligence of the computer to create what we would refer to in genealogy as cluster. So clusters of people and cluster research. And so instead of going through and doing this by hand on a spreadsheet or marking them on a map, by putting your family tree into MyHeritage and then going and looking at the results of that, you can see in any one of the countries of the world, each where any of your ancestors came from, and you can see where the people all originated. Now, if you're looking at that map on Sweden, that's up in the middle there, you'll see there are a lot of people gathered into specific areas and more smaller areas. But as you zoom in, you can see exactly where all those people are. But you'll also see there's people spread out. And it's important to understand that those outliers, the people that don't match into the groups, may not really even be part of the family. So you have to really look at those carefully. But this is a way to look at and focus in on your families using this. They have the same types of maps on the other websites, on Family Search and on Ancestry. Now, another one, a type of thing that uses the DNA results, if you've started into doing DNA matching and trying to use it as a tool, you'll find that it takes a pretty sophisticated amount of information that you need to learn. But in addition to that, it's pretty guessing, and you need to have more and more information in order to get something accurate. Now, in this case, for example, this is one of the ones using the technology to, in a sense, accelerate and do analysis of your connections. And so here what's happened is that they have used DNA to create a pedigree chart. So here's my parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents. And to the extent that they're there, you can click on them and see the relative relationship in centimorgans and in the DNA matches that are there. So if you get into genealogy, you can do this. We've personally used this to resolve one ancestor who was, in fact, he's on there, Marinus Christensen, who's down towards the bottom of the page, was adopted. And it was a family tradition, but no one was able to really validate that family tradition. And on the other hand, once we had a DNA match with someone who was not our direct line ancestor, as we knew about, and also did the genealogy, we found out that we were related to his parents, and we found people by DNA matches who are descendants of his parents that match us for genealogy. So he was in fact adopted, and we now know who his parents were. So that's all comes about it as a result of DNA testing. So here's, for example, another one, parent matches. And what this does is it tells you what percentage of your DNA came from which parent. So in other words, from your father or from your mother, and then they tell you what lines came from those two different areas. So you can begin to see how the genealogy splits as it goes back. So that gives you more information and could possibly resolve some of the difficult situations that you have. So what will the future offer us? Well, whatever. I would very much expect some very substantial information coming from using artificial intelligence and handwriting recognition as we get faster and faster and more accurate into that. A lot of the documents that have been very difficult to research may become searchable over time in greater quantities as that happens. And new technologies, which we probably couldn't have imagined, being able to animate an old photograph are things that may or may not impact genealogy per se. They may be more attention grabbers or things like that. But on the other hand, some of the information that's been lost because it's not readable or because the pictures are so bad may be more available to us. There are other things, the increases in computers and computer technology and cameras and all of the other devices that we use, all the physical electronic devices, as they continue to become faster, bigger, better. One thing, for example, that I'm considering, I back up onto 8 and 10 terabyte hard drives for all the information that I have. And I've usually tried to back up, because they're so large, I've backed up onto 6 different hard drives just in order to make sure the information gets preserved. But what has happened now is the cost of hard drives continues to drop, and now you can buy, and they're up to 22 terabyte hard drives that are going to be available. And the price there is considerably less. And I may be able to take all of the information I have on that takes up 2 hard drives, put it onto 1 hard drive, and cut down the number of hard drives that I use for backups by half. So it doesn't free up any disk space, but it makes my life a little bit better because I don't have to copy the stuff to so many different locations.
There's a question.
Okay.
Are there technologies for face recognition for unknown photos?
Yes, there are. I haven't seen it on Family Search at all, but it is on MyHeritage. MyHeritage has face recognition. It'll search through all your photos and try and find the ones that match a face. And if you're on a large database like MyHeritage, and a lot of people have added photos to your collection, you may very well find that someone has identified a photo that you didn't know who it was before. Yeah, I mean, it exists, and the technology is becoming very, very, very sophisticated. Sophisticated enough that there are lawsuits out there questioning whether it's getting into too much of the privacy issues.
Just another question. What do you do with the papers after you've worked through them? Are they digitized? Do you get rid of them, donate them to a local archival place, or put them back in the box and keep them?
Well, all three. We've gotten rid of probably a few hundred pounds of documents over the last few months because we've found that there were things that we just were not interested in preserving. For instance, my mother loved to collect programs for plays and things, and we're not going to preserve that. That's going to be somebody else that's doing preserving. It's not part of our personal collection. So we make that decision, and those kind of get thrown away. But on the other hand, there's other things can be donated. It is quite a process. If you have a substantial collection and you want to know whether or not it would be accepted by an archive, You're welcome to call us or dial in on the virtual help desk and ask questions about it, because I've donated a number of collections at different levels of photographs to the University of Arizona, big collection to BY, and a number of collections to the BYU Special Collections Library, the Church History Library in Salt Lake City, and the Family History Library in Salt Lake City. So all of those have substantial collections of stuff that I've given them to. But you have to be careful, and you have to have it organized and all sorts of things.